let's move on to the main news item of this episode. Woj tweeted that Denver Nuggets star Jamal Murray agreed on his 4-year, $208 million maximum contract extension, mentioned all the agents, all the Woj things. So now Jamal is going to be locked up for the next 5 seasons. My understanding of this deal is that it is 4 years fully guaranteed. There are no options, team option or player option. The Nuggets haven't officially announced this deal, so we don't technically know the details or any potential, stipulations that might be in the contract. But from all reporting, it doesn't sound like there are any. So I find the timing of this to be interesting if the Nuggets weren't going to get any concessions, I guess, on Jamal's part. But it's here. We got the max extension done. Will, what is your reaction to this?
I'm very happy. It was fun for a bit to speculate on why the extension wasn't coming. The extension coming now, there can still be more speculation because we can talk about that. But ultimately, I just wanted a deal to be done. I think most of the time, locking up your best players is a very good thing. You don't want them to necessarily hit free agency, which is becoming less and less common now. But even back in the day, it's kind of like the reason why we lost KCP, right? He's a free agent. People can offer him a big contract. You want to extend them and keep them. The only downside that people are bringing up is they're kind of low on Jamal right now. And so they don't know that giving him a max like this is necessarily the most responsible thing. I think he deserves it. I think the Nuggets should give it to him, look like an organization who is professional and treats their stars with respect. Not that all the concerns are like irrational or anything, because he does have too many soft tissue injuries for everyone's liking. How do you feel about it?
I was just happy that the deal was finally done, honestly. Like you said, like the Nuggets behaving like an organization that's professional, although I look at it a little bit differently than you. Treating players with respect, great. Like, love that. But I think that really it was more about the downside of not doing this, like going into training camp with everybody getting questions every single day about Jamal and his maximum extension, potentially going into the season with everybody uh, getting questions about Jamal and his
Hmm.
potential max extension. And
Him
I'm
maybe
sure
being
that they wanted to
frustrated.
get this done before Jokic got back to Denver because he does not want to answer press questions about anything, let alone this, about money in the NBA and like all of that. So I actually think that the team had um, a more expedited deadline on this than maybe even people thought about. I saw some people that were like, let's just see how Jamal looks in preseason before we hand over this deal and all that. And like, guys, the front office does not want to have to answer to Jokic about why he has to keep getting these questions because they still haven't gotten this deal done. I'm sure. Because like, what does Jokic aim for than
Hmm.
having to answer dumb questions from NBA media on the concerns? Like, I get it. I don't actually care. Like, the number is the number. Like, that's just how much money NBA players, NBA stars in particular, are making these days. But I do understand the concerns about what it means for the team's, roster building future, if there is one, because next season, in all likelihood, should they keep AG, they will be a second apron team. So then the concern becomes like, are they going to let AG go because they don't want to be a second apron team? And that's because of Jamal's deal, like kind of putting them over the top there. The other thing that I don't actually remember if I've brought up on the show before is that I don't think that they would work to um, extend Aaron Gordon before they got Jamal's deal done. Just order of operations, right? You want to get your star players, your most important players, your most expensive players really out of the way first, usually, unless you're the Philadelphia 76ers. So role players are going to have to wait. AG becomes extension eligible on September 27th. If they hadn't gotten this deal with Jamal done, especially going into the season, because I'm pretty sure AG cannot sign an extension once the regular season starts, then I would have doubted highly that they got a deal done. And then we would have gone through the whole rigmarole of wondering, will he stay or will he go when we get to the off season next year? And I do not want to go through that again, especially with a piece that is so key and integral as AG. So I'm really hoping now This puts a clock on the front office to me starting on September 27th to get an extension done with AG so that I know what the hell they're doing next summer, right? A lot of people talked in the championship season about how important it was that everybody on the team was rowing in the same direction. Everybody had gotten paid. They had extended KCP almost immediately after that trade had happened. Jokic had signed his supermax that previous summer. Bruce and Jeff were the only guys that were potentially not being locked up. So we would definitely want to make sure that everybody in the starting lineup minimum is good to go. And our bench, we have guys like Russ and Dario that their contract situations just are what they are because of the fact that they're minimum and taxpayer Emily players. But when it comes to the starters, you definitely just want everybody locked up so that that's not a question. Just take that off the table because we have so many other questions about this team that need to be answered this year, and you just don't want this distraction there, both on an individual player level and on a team-wide level at all.
The distraction element is important, and I am glad that's over. And even though, I mean, they could offer the extension and still have reservations or things that they want Jamal to prove this season. All fans have that because we want Jamal to be the Jamal that we know that he can be. So the consistency is a question. The injuries are a question. I was wondering if you think that calling Jamal injury prone at this point is fair. Like, would you say Jamal is an injury prone player?
I think that's fair because somebody that tore their ACL, if they had no other issues having gone on in their career, I don't necessarily think that that's fair to call them injury prone. But although these lower leg injuries, they just tend to come in clusters sometimes. You just tend to be a little bit more susceptible to things sometimes after that injury. But even before the ACL, Jamal dealt with like little nicks and things all the time. One of the things I actually wanted to look up was, regardless of what you think about how Jamal ranks compared to these guys, he's going to be getting paid comparable to guys like Donovan Mitchell and Devin Booker. And Jamal has definitely, I looked at the last 4 seasons, and even if you took out the ACL season, he's played on average 57 games per season. Donovan has only played 60, which was interesting over the last 4 years. And then Booker has only played 64 games per season. So all of them are under the 65 game threshold on average for the last 4 seasons, which is not great. It's just interesting that those, 3 guards that are making max money with these inconsistent injury histories, Jamal being the worst of them, obviously, even if you take out the year that he missed with the ACL. I do think that it's fair to, at this point, at least consider them injury prone, but there's obviously a spectrum of that. Like, this isn't Embiid, nor does he provide the production that Embiid does in the regular season either. This isn't, and the thing is, they tend to be all things that you unfortunately classify as kind of coming in clusters or being related to each other. These lower leg injuries, they tend to compound just because of things that you're doing to compensate because of one could make you more susceptible to another. We saw that last year. He had obviously the hamstring at the beginning of the season. At some point, he was dealing with bilateral ankle sprains, which was just like, okay, he's got both ankle sprains. Then he had the shin splints. Then he had the ankle things again. And then in the playoffs, obviously, he had the calf strain. So it was just like the lower leg season not from hell, because obviously it could have been a much more severe injury, such as the one that kept him out for an entire season in 2021 to 2022. Do you disagree with someone saying like, hey, like injury prone? I think that that's just kind of the reality of how his regular seasons have gone, even if you take out the ACL season. But I can understand someone also wanting to include that because it's like that did happen.
I don't disagree. Like I guess I just didn't really know where I stood on that because I had heard some people saying like Jamal's injury prone, and I was like, oh, is this just like an accepted like fact about him now? And
I think last season really kind of solidified it, right?
yeah, I guess so. But I thought, was the timing of his ACL part of it? Because it was like the worst possible time because he missed 2 postseasons because of that, right? Whereas like if it was at the beginning of one season, he might have only missed one. And I think kind of compounded the baggage around that injury because it was like 2 postseasons that he missed. But also, yeah, last season, then he had the ankle and
The
just
year before the ACL, it was a shortened season, but he only played 48 games. That year, Donovan Mitchell played 53 and Booker played 67.
sometimes players are either not conditioned enough or strong enough, or they added too much weight to their body that, all this jumping and landing, is just taking a toll on the body, like with the Embiids and the Zions of the world.
Yeah, all that
Jamal
jumping that Embiid is doing. It's more like falling, like he's just falling
falling.
on his own.
But it's also like it's a conversation topic with AD. Like, is he too heavy? And that's why he's, sustaining these injuries.
But
Sometimes it
like
is
bigs are
just,
also like particularly susceptible to these ankle injuries for all the not ankle but joint injuries because of those very reasons,
mhm,
because you're putting more pressure on your joints and more weight on your joints on a consistent basis. And then you
yeah.
obviously have like the big events that could cause like an acute injury as opposed to things that kind of build up over time also.
But then there was the where do you want to use for excuse or just season lesson in hindsight of playing the starters too much? Maybe the stagger lineups with Jamal like riding him
But
to the bench a lot was too
But
much
Jamal played the least of any of the starters.
because he was just in terms of games played.
Games played, like obviously minutes. I mean, minutes per game, he's on par with all the other guys. I think it was probably like AG maybe played the least minutes per game, which I agree. Like I think that's how it should be. I mean, people make a whole thing about like the minutes that the starters played and like the staggers and things like that. That's more of an issue late in the season. Jamal was having these issues early in the season
Right.
when
Yeah.
starters are across the league are playing 32 to 34 minutes per game. This wasn't the late season stuff happened, obviously, like we talked about the shin splints and then obviously the calf strain later when guys are playing 38, 39, 40 minutes per game. But even early in the season, when he has the hamstring, they're only playing 32 to 34 minutes per game, depending on the game.
I think sometimes I ask myself when someone's labeled injury prone if it's related to it being like their fault, like whether it's there's something inherently about their body that's off, their tissues are softer, their bones are weaker, or if it's like a stylistic choice in how they play that leads to it, or if it's an off-season issue with them not doing enough due diligence to like protect themselves going into the season. At the end of the day, there's only so much you can control. Sometimes a dude's gonna fall into your leg and like blow your knee out. Like sometimes it's gonna happen. I think some players are allowed to have like a
Or sometimes
significant
you're going to fall into somebody else and blow your knee out.
hint, hint. Yeah. I sometimes don't even know what injury prone means. Is it if it's
It
just
means
like
you
this?
get injuries. Like, I think that there is a connotation of it's kind of their fault sometimes, but other times, like, you could look at a Kawhi Leonard and be like, he's not the cause of his injuries. Like, he's a well-conditioned guy. Maybe some people think like, oh, you don't play enough games, and maybe that's why your body's not, whatever. But also the reason that they started load managing him in the first place was because he was getting injured. So it's like nothing seems to work. He got hurt last year despite playing like a record number of games for the last 5 years of his career. Like I think sometimes there is like again, sometimes it is a connotation of like it's their fault because of like a play style thing or whatever. But other times it's like this person's body is just like is what it is. This is something that I talked about when we first got the news of okay, this max contract extension is going to happen with Jamal, and then we were waiting for like a week or two, and it was getting into like okay, we're like a couple weeks into free agency now, and we still haven't heard the official news, right? If Jamal is going to be like missing time, because that's really what we're talking about here, right? For the most
Yeah.
part, except in the playoffs where he did play despite being injured, like when he's on the floor, he's fine, like he's good, right? We wish that maybe he'd like level up a little bit more. And clearly he's like working himself into shape in the regular season, but whatever. Like he's making an obvious impact, positive impact on the floor when he's on the floor in the regular season. But we're talking about the missing games. And one of the things I mentioned was just like we have to be honest about the state that like what is reasonable to expect from Jamal and Jamal's body, frankly, at this stage. Like if he is going to be quote unquote injury prone, we have to like um factor in a certain number of missed games per year because that's going to affect how we build the roster. If that's the case, this was mostly as part of a discussion about like, should it be a full max? I don't think that like offering less than a full max would have been quote unquote disrespectful to the player. It might have pissed him off anyway, but it would have been potentially, I think arguably, a recognition of the reality of like, we have to build our roster differently because you miss X number of games. So we need to like, I don't know, go out and get like another scoring guard and whatever, at a high level, because we have to factor that in. And that's just a fact of how this is, especially under the new CBA, where the second apron, it seems many teams are treating it as effectively a hard cap.
I'm just kind of going in on the injury aspects of it because that is the big question about Jamal. I guess I didn't fully subscribe to the he's injury prone and that's just the reality of him as a player because all the injuries were understandable to me. Like
But they happened.
even if,
Right?
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Even if you can explain away every injury, like the amount of them is going to, label you as an injury prone player. The narrative that we've been given is that he had a kind of championship hangover offseason, maybe didn't do enough conditioning or whatever.
Seemed
Came
like he
into
had the
this,
same kind of off season that he's been having, frankly,
yeah,
from
just
all
kind of
accounts.
coming into the season, trying to play himself into shape or something and peak at the right time. That was always the narrative. That's what the coaches and even Calvin Booth said, that they wished he did some more things in the offseason. Maybe do you think that they saw enough from him from coming in and working out and whatever and them evaluating his health? Did they get some piece of info that made them feel like it was time to pull the trigger on it? Or was it just always they were going to just do this no matter what?
I think they were going to do this. I think they were going to do it before training camp. The timing of it, I think, is interesting because someone pointed out that this came like the day after all of those reports about the discord between Malone and the front office, as if that was news because it wasn't new what, Zach Lowe and them were talking about this week. Because it's something that we've been talking about all of last season, really, and beyond, because they're like, Malone doesn't want to play young guys, and Calvin Booth wants to develop young guys, and Malone's trying to win a championship, and all of this stuff. Whatever. That wasn't new, but it was being talked about. And then the next day, we get this news. And I thought it was interesting. I don't know how much this team likes to react to external media reports. Like, by all accounts, for the most part, this isn't something that happens. Like, no, it's not like anyone's like come out. It's not like Malone's like doing interviews being like, no, Calvin Booth and I are totally copacetic or anything like that. But we get the Jamal extension. And you and I talked about the day that the original Shams report came out that they were working on this max extension. It was the day 2 of the draft. It was also the day that KCP opted out of his player option, signaling that he was going to be entering free agency, and the day that they salary dumped Reggie Jackson. And the Jamal news was kind of sandwiched in between those things. And I'm like, oh, something good. And I'm like, was that intentional? I don't know, because I couldn't tell if that information was coming from the team or from the player, but it did come out. Yeah, I don't know. I think I find the timing interesting just from that perspective, from the PR management perspective, because they do still have a couple weeks left until training camp. You don't want to leave it till like the day before because you're still going to get questions about it, and he's going to get questions about it anyway. Everyone's going to be like, "Oh, like, are you happy for Jamal like signing this max extension? Like, the organization is reaffirming their investment, their commitment to Jamal, and like all of this stuff." It's more, but it would be more probably the questions would be more in the vein of like fluff as opposed to, so like, what's going on with this team? Is everybody like rowing in the same direction? Like, what's going on with this team next year? Are you guys working on the extension? Because obviously Jamal is a player that would have been eligible to sign his extension even going into the regular season. I have to decide I have to find out how they decide that rule, like why certain players can sign their extensions in season and some can't. But yeah, I think it's interesting, and I do think that the injury angle is the main thing, because when he's on the floor, Jamal can be incredibly impactful, obviously, especially on offense.
There's an idea that players play through injuries a lot, like all players play through injuries and still play well, and there's stories and accounts of that. But I don't think it should be underestimated how impactful an injury can be to a professional athlete who is playing in an insanely competitive league where you are used to having full like control of your body and what you are capable of, and then when all of a sudden there is a part of you that is not firing, it's affecting your shot and how explosive you can be off the dribble, and maybe catching you off guard when you're thinking I can do these things, and then all of a sudden you're not able to. I do think it is one of those things where there's a handful or more of players in the NBA whose contracts actually properly reflect the value of them as a player. Maybe this max is a little over what Jamal's doing because of the inconsistencies and all that, but it's like appropriate to me for the Nuggets, like in a vacuum.
Absolutely, because the alternative is a complete garbage plan. That's something that I think is underestimated, an underestimated part of the calculus, and why I thought this would always get done and should have always gotten done, like regardless of how badly he played in the playoffs and in the Olympics, is that if we won, losing Jamal in free agency would be just a complete disaster. Like if he walked for nothing, let's say if he went to, I don't know, Brooklyn, who's going to have a bunch of cap space next year or something, we would not get that salary slot back. We're not going to be able to just sign another max player. That's not how it works when you're a team that is already over the salary cap. You're able to extend your own guys, but getting in new players is very difficult. If they would have gone through this entire season not knowing, what Jamal's, situation was going to be, and it would have loomed over the team like the darkest of clouds, because of the constant questioning that they would have gotten about it. And obviously the knowledge of like, we don't know what's going to happen to this core at the end of this year, right? Because it would have also spelled uncertainty for AG, right? If they're willing to let Jamal go, then like, what's the plan for keeping our, third or fourth most important player? And then obviously would have pissed off Jokic on top of that. And, we have all these young players that, need to be developing around a more stable core, if you will. And yeah, it would have been all bad stuff. I'm not saying that it's going to be all good stuff moving forward, because Jamal still has to like show up. And it isn't just the health questions, because he isn't as consistent in the regular season as he, has been in the playoffs, despite the positive impact that he still manages to bring to the floor. If he can build off of the kind of, the averages that he was building off of in the regular season last year, I think that would be good, but perhaps not enough now that we have, lost another key player in KCP, and we have more young players that need to develop around, like I said, a stable core. Like having a more consistent point guard would probably help with that too. The team is clearly demanding a lot of Jamal now, because with the max extension comes expectations. And like you said, you hope that he is able to show up, do the work, and, live up to those things, because he's entirely capable of it. Like we've seen it from him. Thanks for everybody for sticking around this long. Over half of you are not subscribed to the channel. So if you do like our content, please remember to subscribe, hit the like button, share it, hit the notification bell, leave us a review, a 5-star review, preferably, on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at What's in a Game NBA. We also have our new clip channel in the description. The link is in the description at What's in a Game NBA clips. And always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks. Let's get back to winning.